The NFL's second round pick problem could lead to a little bit of a mini holdout between the Saints and second round pick Tyler Shough, but I'm going to tell you why Saints fans shouldn't be worried. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to take a deep dive look at the New Orleans Saints wide receiver position, why more 11 personnel really stresses the need for a solid slot receiver, why Chris Olave could be the most highly anticipated return this offseason. And we're going to kick everything off with a quick look over at quarterback because the NFL's second round pick problem could very soon become a New Orleans Saints second round pick problem. I'm going to tell you why you shouldn't push the panic button when and if it does. We got all that coming up for you on today's show. We appreciate you very much, whether it's your first time or your next time being here with us this time and making us your first listen, being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. The NFL has a major second round pick problem that it's got to get figured out ideally before training camp, but that has already not been the case, but also at least ahead of a couple of weeks into training camp. You want to get this solved as soon as possible. And it could very well turn into a little bit of an event for the New Orleans Saints and second round pick and potential starting quarterback, Tyler Shough. So we're going to discuss what the second round pick problem is, why it has a ripple effect on the New Orleans Saints, and ultimately why you shouldn't be concerned. And I want to start there because I want this to be very clear. We've broken this down on the show before, but I thought it would be a good idea to come back to it now that we're, a week and a day ahead of the Saints reporting for training camp. Yay, yippee. Like, I'm so excited for football to be back. But I wanted to come back to this, make sure that if you're tuning in for the first time or if you've forgotten the details of this and the nuance of this, that we did a little bit of a refresher on it. But this is not a panic situation. This is not an issue that arises from some malcontent somewhere. This is not an issue that arises from some selfishness somewhere or maliciousness anywhere. This is all about standard, precedent, and a changing landscape of contract negotiation. That is all that this is about. This is a second round pick situation, not a Tyler Shough situation. So that's the thing to keep in mind throughout all of this, right? As we're discussing this, remember Tyler Shough's not the one that sits in Mickey Loomis and Kai Harley's conference room and negotiates the contract. He is not having those conversations. So this is not about Tyler Shough. This is not a situation in which Tyler Shough or his team are wanting something unreasonable and therefore a contract does not come to an agreement with. And under every circumstance, if you don't have a signed contract by the time that training camp starts, you should not take the football field because if you get injured, you've got nothing protecting you. It's not the same thing as OTAs and mandatory minicamp when you have a participation agreement and all those other pieces. This is different. You want to have a contract before you go out there and risk injury. So these are all things to keep in mind. This is not a situation where Tyler Shough's being selfish and he's being unreasonable. No. It's none of that junk. This is something else that's much bigger than any one player and much bigger than any one player's team of negotiators. And it's much bigger than any one NFL team. What's going on right now is a major shift in the landscape for previously negotiated contracts that have been on the NFL's collective bargaining agreement since like 2011-ish. And so what this really comes down to is that two players, really most notably one, Jaden Higgins, the wide receiver of the Houston Texans, who is drafted with the second selection of the second round, the 34th overall selection, he became the first player in NFL history to ever get a fully guaranteed second round contract. It had never happened before because he is pick number 34 and the second pick of the second round. That meant that the first pick of the second round was also going to get a fully guaranteed second round pick. That was Carson Schlesinger, the linebacker of UCLA with the Cleveland Browns. So that was automatic, right? Once pick 34 got that, pick 33 was going to get that. So that was done. Now what's happening is that everybody from pick 35 on through pick 64 are trying to figure out where they fall in all of this. At what point does a team or does a player no longer, or a player's representation, no longer get that fully guaranteed second round contract? And with Tyler Shough being the 40th overall selection, the 8th pick in that second round, there's no rush for Tyler Shough's people to say, yeah, we'll take less than a fully guaranteed contract, because picks 35 through 39 have not yet accepted anything less than a fully guaranteed second round contract, because they haven't agreed to a contract yet, because they got to get all this figured out. So 39 is waiting on 38, 38 is waiting on 37, 37 is waiting on 36, 36 is waiting on 35. Because if you are the team that gives a fully guaranteed contract to pick number 40, then you have just negotiated a fully guaranteed second round contract for picks 35 through 39 if those haven't been signed yet. If pick 35 does not get a fully guaranteed second round contract and instead gets 95% or 90% of it guaranteed, then you'll start to see the numbers kind of trickle down from there. And so you need to kind of wait and see how this all pans out. And so now what is happening is that players without a signed second round contract, this is a completely understandable thing, have already begun to not appear and not report for training camp on their reporting date. The first player to do this was former Ole Miss, now current Los Angeles Chargers wide receiver Trey Harris. Trey Harris, who was like towards the bottom part of the second round, he does not have a second round contract signed yet, and therefore did not report for training camp. An understandable decision, because if you go out there and you play not on a contract, you have no guarantees and all these other things, and you get injured, you're in trouble, right? Or could end up in trouble. If you are somebody that's at the bottom of the second round, you're not signing a fully guaranteed deal or anything less than a fully guaranteed deal until somebody else does, right? So you're waiting to see how everything goes. So here's what I would expect. At some point, somewhere in the second round, someone is not going to get a 100% guaranteed contract. They might get a 98% guaranteed contract or a 95% guaranteed contract. They will get something above what their predecessor second round pick in that position got. So for instance, the New Orleans Saints selected Tyler Shough in the second round at pick 40 overall. Okay. So now we're getting into this is how this affects the Saints. So last year's 40th overall selection was Cooper DeJean, the defensive back with the Philadelphia Eagles. He got 80.46. We'll just call it 80.5 for the sake of our conversation. Although for anybody that's in this negotiating room, you're rocking with 80.46. Like you're rocking with the most precise number possible. But 80.5, 80.5% of that contract was guaranteed. Now, remember when we're talking about this contract, by the way, we're talking about a total 4-year, $9.3-ish million. $9.283 million is what it is. 28.3 if anybody wanted it. And so we're not talking about a lot of money here. When you think about that over the course of 4 years, right? We're not talking about, $100 million guaranteed here or anything like that. We're talking about less than $10 million guaranteed if Tyler Shough were to get the 100% guaranteed deal. So not an issue for the Saints if that happens. Like there's no bad money moves here. You just probably don't want to be the team to negotiate ahead of the precedent that's being set. And that's all that this is about. This is all about new precedent, new territory entirely for the NFL. So if you hear on the 22nd that Tyler Shough has not reported for training camp, do not worry. It is not bad blood between Tyler Shough and the Saints. The fact of the matter is that players get the opportunity to organize, which they need to do in this situation, and teams don't, right? They don't get the opportunity to collude. They just got in trouble for collusion. So they're not going to go that route. And so the players might, in solidarity, say, until we all figure out how this is happening, none of us are appearing. And that is a logical thing to do from a workers' union standpoint, right? Just from a bare minimum workers' union standpoint. And all of these guys are unionized, NFLPA, so on and so forth. So do not be surprised if that happens, but do not panic if it does happen either, right? Like hopefully they'll get this all taken care of. They got another week. We'll see how things begin to progress. The Saints are not far down the line here. 35 through 39, might have to go first before they make a decision at 40, but we'll see where things go. Okay, so here you go. Nothing to worry about if, when, if that all happens. Now, let's turn our attention to the wide receiver position because the return of Chris Olave might be the most highly anticipated return on the New Orleans Saints roster going into training camp. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. You can download the Game Time app today because it is the best place to go to pick up your tickets, especially if you're a last-minute ticket buyer like myself. Maybe you're out of town and you decide you want to go and see what kind of events are going on in the city that you're staying in. Maybe you are just at home and you decide on a spontaneous night, hey, date night, let's go and see what's going on. Game Time is the place to go. And of course, you'd also pick up your tickets for the New Orleans Saints all throughout the season, and you can save up to 60% with their killer last-minute deals, zone deals as well, where you can pick they will pick the best seats in a section that you select. They have a ton that you can check out over at Game Time today. So take all the guesswork out of buying tickets by picking up and downloading the Game Time app today. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. You get $20 off of your first purchase. Again, terms apply. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, family. The New Orleans Saints have one of the biggest, I think, most highly anticipated returns on their team at the wide receiver spot, and that is with wide receiver Chris Olave. Now, he's not the only return on that side of the football, no doubt about it. However, I think he's the most highly anticipated return at the position. This is a guy that before he had sort of that unfortunate end early into his season last year, multiple concussions and head injuries throughout the season, a brutal hit that he took over the middle of the field against the Carolina Panthers led to him being carted off. He was then effectively done for the rest of the season. However, he did make his way back out to the practice field before the season was done. So he did get his practice window open and then practice those last 3 weeks or so of the season. Never made it back to the football field during a regular season game, but it was a real big positive to see him back out there during practices and all those other things, having a blast. I mean, Darren Rizzi talked about it a ton, talked about how it's a great human story, right? That he was back out there on the football field, having a blast, being out there with his teammates again, all those other things. Spent the offseason kind of training, working on, as I understand it, like neck muscle build and stuff like that to kind of help absorb some of those hits when he goes to the ground and head injuries and all those other things that kind of come with that. And now, going into 2025, he's looking to make a return, and he's looking to make a return in a big way. Let's not forget that the first 2 seasons that Chris Olave was a New Orleans Saint, right? Since being drafted back in 2022, 1,000-yard receiver in 2022, 4 touchdowns that season, 4 receiving touchdowns that season. Over 1,000 yards again in 2023, 5 receiving touchdowns that season. Only had 400 receiving yards and a touchdown last year. But I think that he is going to be a much bigger focal point in the New Orleans Saints offense and passing game under Kellen Moore than he was under Clint Kubiak. Clint Kubiak liked a lot of the check down, get underneath kind of work, or deep down the field to Rashid Shaheed. Like, those are the things that Clint Kubiak really seemed to like. Those are the things that Derek Carr really seemed to like. But as I've watched Chris Olave working with Tyler Shough, watched Chris Olave working with Spencer Rattler, there is a lot of chemistry that he's building with these young quarterbacks. And I think that all of that is going to pay off coming into training camp, where he's going to have this opportunity to really jump back on the scene and blast off immediately. Again, 11 practices here in New Orleans, another 5 or so practices out in California. 9 of the 11 practices are going to be open to the public as well. I believe there are still tickets available if you haven't gotten yours yet, but you can find out more about Chris Olave because you'll be able to see almost all of training camp. And I think that he's going to be somebody, number 12, is going to stand out quite a bit. I know that he's hungry. I know he can't wait to be back out on the football field and prove that he can stay on the football field, because I'm sure that he's heard the questions around all that, all those other things. But I think this is one of the most highly anticipated returns for the New Orleans Saints is Chris Olave. Now, it becomes really interesting because there's other returns at that position that I think are going to be highly anticipated as well. You can't have a high octane offense or an explosive offense without an explosive play or without explosive plays. And you can't have explosive plays without an explosive player. And one of the best explosive players that generates explosive plays in the NFL is Rashid Shaheed. And remember, his season ended early last year too, right? He had the knee surgery to where it was going to be either they go in, they do kind of the more simple version of the surgery or procedure, and then he could have made it back before the end of the season. Or once they got in and then saw that the damage maybe looked a certain way, then they would have had to make the decision to have sort of the kind of more severe or more substantial rather procedure. And then that was going to roll him out for the rest of the season. And the latter is what happened. He ended up having to get the more substantial procedure done. And so that ended up costing him the rest of the season. But from the moment that we saw him during OTAs, when he was out there, the speed is still there for Shaheed. He has not lost a step. He is right back at game speed. And hopefully this kind of cleanup that they did ends up helping him out in the long run in terms of being able to stay healthy throughout the season, because he is easily right alongside names like Tyreek Hill, maybe newly implanted wide receiver in this conversation would be Xavier Worthy with the Kansas City Chiefs. But Rashid Shaheed is up there with the most explosive wide receivers in the game, with these massive 20 plus, 40 plus yard plays generated over the course of his early career, all those other things. I say it all the time, respect Rashid Shaheed's gangsta. And I think that he's another one of those big returns that comes at this position that could be massive for New Orleans, because I would advocate that it makes more sense to get the ball in Rashid Shaheed's hands in a multitude of ways beyond just the deep ball, right? The short area, the intermediate area, utilizing him more in the run game and jet sweep actions and things like that, utilizing him out of the backfield. Even if you're not actually throwing the football to him, just let him run an angle route, right? Just to be a decoy and things like that. But then also, if you can get the ball to him in those situations in the open field on the run, then go for it. Like, I think that Rashid Shaheed, who maybe, could take a step back in terms of return responsibilities in this case, I guess, I don't know. I think you just want to give the ball to the guy that has the ability to be explosive, right? So let him have the kick returns, let him have the punt returns, let him have the ball in the intermediate and short areas, and let him be a deep threat, and let him be somebody that can potentially take some snaps out of the backfield for you as a little bit of a gadget guy and things like that, especially if you're not going to have Taysom Hill early in the season. Being able to get Rashid Shaheed involved in a multitude of different ways could be really interesting. So I think not only is the return of Rashid Shaheed also exciting, just like the return of Chris Olave is, I also would advocate and say, or not advocate, but I would also wager rather, that the other thing that's exciting is how does his role grow and change going into this season? So that's another one I would be watching out for. And that's not even the last return that we'll see over on the wide receiver position. Another big one that's really interesting is Bub Means, going into his second year, has impressed during OTAs and minicamp, has improved, it looks like, as a route runner, understanding leverage, understanding how to stack and then decelerate and accelerate in order to create natural separation, all those other pieces, is one of the bigger bodies, right? One of the few 6'2" guys on this roster, along with Donovan Peoples-Jones and Kevin Austin Jr. and others. I think that Bub Means is another guy to absolutely watch out for. I don't think he's going to be a 1,000-yard receiver here in his second year, but I could see him being more involved in this offense and getting more opportunities in it. He's got good speed. He is a willing blocker. He's a willing everything. Like, ask him to do whatever on a football field and he'll do it. You want him to be a long snapper? I'm sure he'll figure it out. Like, that's his attitude. And then also, you have the ability to be able to utilize him as kind of a bigger physical guy in the passing game. I think that Bub Means could have a real role, whether it be as a fourth or fifth wide receiver that rotates in every now and then as a perimeter guy, maybe even a slot guy if they want to give him those opportunities as well. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. So I think for all three of those players, when the game of being a wide receiver is all about separation, all three of those players have shown an ability to be able to create that, have shown an ability to be able to create and develop chemistry with their young quarterbacks, and all have a unique version of their own skill set that could easily be one of the more exciting, make them one of the more exciting players on this roster. And so I think for all three of those guys, and especially Chris Olave, the anticipation is high when it comes to those returns. That's not all I want to discuss when it comes to the wide receiver position. Looking at where the offense was last year and what Kellen Moore's offenses have done in the past, I think we're going to see a lot more three wide receiver sets. And so that stresses the need for a difference maker in the slot. And I want to break down who that might be. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation, continuing our deep dive into the New Orleans Saints' new offense under Kellen Moore. And I wanted to take a look at the distribution of 3 wide receiver snaps because I think a lot more 11 personnel and 3 wide receiver looks are going to be on the way for the New Orleans Saints in 2025. And that brings to light more reason to stress the importance of who gets those slot snaps for the New Orleans Saints. So let's go back to last year real quick and we'll fill in the dots in terms of where the Saints were, what Kellen Moore did, and what the NFL did as a whole when it came to 11 personnel. Just as a reminder, first digit on those 2-digit numbers, 11, 12 personnel, 22 personnel, 23 personnel, 13 personnel, so on and so forth. First digit of those 2-digit numbers is the number of running backs. Second digit is the number of tight ends. And so we're talking about 11 personnel. There's 5 total skill position players in the field at any given time, 5 offensive linemen, 1 quarterback, that's 6, 5 skill position players, tight end, wide receiver, running back, all make up the rest of the 11 that are on the field. So with that, that's what you're looking at kind of figuring out here. So if it's 1 tight end, 1 running back, that means that's 2 players down. You need 3 more. The rest are wide receivers. So that's kind of the idea here. The NFL's average at 11 personnel, which dominates the NFL, by the way, we'll dig into the history of that another time, but it dominates the NFL, these 11 personnel, 3 wide receiver sets. Although we're seeing 2 tight end sets tick up as offenses try to get bigger after forcing defenses to get smaller. The chess game of the NFL will forever ebb and flow. It's a lot of fun that way. The Saints, or rather the NFL average last year in 11 personnel stats, according to True Media, was 61.1%. 61.1%. The New Orleans Saints, 33.3% of their offensive snaps were in 11 personnel, well below the league average. They were second from the bottom last year, number 31 in the NFL. Now, I got curious, what did Kellen Moore's offense, which was a very run-heavy offense in Philadelphia, which meant a lot more bigger bodies on the field, a lot more 2 tight end sets on the field, would have made a lot of sense. However, Philadelphia, almost right at the league average, just below the league average, 59.9%. So they were 14th in the NFL. So they were just above the middle of the NFL, but yet just below the NFL's average of 61.1%. But the difference between the New Orleans Saints at 33% and the Philadelphia Eagles at 59.9%, massive, right? So I think you should expect to see more 11 personnel snaps here in New Orleans, more 3 wide receiver sets in New Orleans. It's not just because Kellen Moore ran 59.9% of his offense with the Philadelphia Eagles last year in 11 personnel. It's more than that. 2023 with the Los Angeles Chargers, 70%. 2022, Dallas Cowboys, 61%. You don't need to remember these numbers. Dallas Cowboys again in 2021, 62.3%. 2020, 71.4%, his highest. And then 66.8% his first year as a play caller with the Dallas Cowboys back in 2019. So every single year, effectively 60% or above. Obviously last year, 59.9%. So I'm rounding up there, but about double what the New Orleans Saints did last year. So I think you should expect to see more 3 wide receiver sets. Now, there was some context to why the Saints didn't run that many 3 wide receiver sets, right? They were a heavy run offense, so you're probably going to lean in with more 2 tight ends, more 2 running backs, a lot more Taysom Hill, all that kind of stuff. That's a big reason. Also, as we just highlighted, a lot of injury at the position, right? So not often did you have enough wide receivers to go out there and be able to consistently play 3 wide receivers when you only had 4 active on game day, right? So that makes it really challenging. So here's the other challenge now as you hope to be healthier going into 2025, so on and so forth, is that you got Chris Olave, you got Rashid Shaheed, and those guys could take snaps in the slot. I wouldn't be surprised to see them get 20 to 30% of their snaps from the slot because you can move them around, disguise, do some interesting things that way. But I do think you got to find a third receiver that complements these guys, and especially somebody that can be effective from the slot. I think the Saints have 3 options, maybe 4. My 3 options, Brandin Cooks, Cedric Wilson Jr., Mason Tipton. And then as like a 3B, I'll throw in Dante Pettis because phenomenal route runner, probably want to get him out on the field. Also very willing blocker, could be helpful in the slot to expand that offensive line's lateral ability, right? Your protection unit's lateral ability in the run game. But I want to break down these 3 real quick. Brandin Cooks, 2-year, $13 million deal, biggest free agent acquisition at the position this offseason. And so you probably want to get him out on the field. And without a doubt, he, Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed project from this point on July 14th, project to be the team's best 3 wide receivers. So you probably want to get him out on the field. The thing is that he's only seen more than 30% of his snaps 6 times throughout his career in terms of season snaps coming from the slot. His first 3 seasons in the league, right? That's a big thing. And in 2019, 2021, and 2022. So he kind of went on a year, off a year, on a year, off a year, on a year. But he has never seen more than 40% of his snaps from the slot. So to call him a slot specialist would be a little bit, kind of overreaching in terms of that. But I do think that he's going to take quite a few snaps from that area. Your slot specialist is probably Cedric Wilson Jr. The last time that he and Kellen Moore were together, 2021, he had a phenomenal year that year, playing out of majority of the slot. Took more than 90% of his snaps from the slot. That's a slot specialist, right? More than 40%. And in fact, he took 48.2% of his snaps from the slot last year. So Cedric Wilson Jr. is certainly somebody to watch, especially being reunited with Kellen Moore in the process. And then Mason Tipton, I think, was just on his way to a really, really good rookie year. Got injured during camp. If he stays healthy and impresses again, it's going to be hard to keep him off the field. So that's the way I think about it. It's going to be one of those 3 guys, but I expect to see a lot more 3 wide receiver sets on the field for the New Orleans Saints in 2025. All right, coming up in tomorrow's episode, I want to look at some other personnel groups, including why the Saints will probably also still have a lot of 2 tight end sets and much more in your New Orleans Saints in tomorrow's show. In the meanwhile, don't forget to go and check out Jake Madison over at Locked On Pelicans for the latest going on with your Pels. We appreciate you very much. As always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know what the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.